The Island of Dolls, or Isla de las Munecas, is a famous tourist attraction located on the outskirts of Ciudad de Mexico. The island is probably one of the scariest places in the world. It is filled with thousands of broken, eerie-looking dolls. The story behind the Island of Dolls is tragic. It tells us of a man haunted by something he could never quite shake off, who lived mysteriously and died even more mysteriously. In the early 1950s, Julian Santana Barrera decided to leave his wife and children for Chinampa, a sort of rectangular farmland built on shallow lake beds in the Laguna de Texula, nestled between the channels of Xochimilco. He was the owner of the island, and he took no tenants. His closest neighbors were miles away from him. Nobody understood why Julian would suddenly decide to go live alone on a deserted island, so far from his family and friends. But it did not take long for them to find out that Julian was sick in the mind. Before abandoning company and choosing the life of a hermit, Julian had a life-changing encounter that haunted him till the day he died. He was on the island one day when he came across a little girl swimming with her sisters along the bank of a river. They played, and everything was good until a strong current started dragging them underwater. Julian jumped into the water and tried to save them, but the little girl drowned before he could get to her. While her sisters made it back to the village, the girl's body was later dragged out of the river and buried outside the island. After a few days, Julian found the dead girl's doll floating on the river and hung it on a tree. Julian was a very disturbed man, even before this incident. He was a farmer who lived outside the Barrero de la Asuncion neighborhood, where he would go to drink pulque, an alcoholic drink made from the fermented sap of the agave plant after his harvests. After some time, he started preaching the Bible because he felt the people had some erroneous, superstitious beliefs. Many of the locals did not like his preaching, and this led to him being ostracized. He was often alone, preferring his own company to that of others. After Julian found the doll in the river, he claimed that he heard the voice of a young girl crying out, "I want my doll." He became terrified and hung up the doll to appease the girl's spirit. Some accounts claim that from that moment, Julian found a new doll hanging from a tree whenever he went outside. But the more popular narration of the legend is that Julian hung up the girl's doll out of respect for her, and because he wanted to protect himself from becoming possessed by the girl's spirit. Some even say that it was to protect the girl's spirit from the demons in the water. As the story goes, Julian started seeing ghosts on the island. One day, he woke up to find that all of his crops had been destroyed. He believed that the spirit had damaged them, and no matter what he tried, the crops never came back to life. This terrified him, and pushed him to seek out more dolls and hang them on trees all over the island. He often found the dolls floating in canals, and sometimes he would dig through rubbish heaps to find dolls. He was convinced that the girl's spirit was in sorrow. He built an altar in his cabin on the island, where he hung dolls and hoped to appease the girl's spirit. People nearby soon got word of Julian's dolls, and he was always happy to show them. He never feared the dolls. He even considered them his protectors. Yet legend has it that Julian could sometimes hear footsteps, crying, and wails near his house, even though his closest neighbor was miles away. What were the dolls protecting him from? Were they protecting him from the girl's spirit? From his own mind? Julian's family noticed that he collected the dolls as if some unknown force was driving him. He would sometimes exchange agricultural produce from the island for people's dolls. Since he got them from rubbish heaps, canals, or people who wanted to exchange them for fruits and vegetables, the dolls were often in bad shape. But Julian never attempted to fix them, he just hung them up. Did he perhaps feel he would tamper with the dolls' protective powers if he tried to clean and repair them? Julian collected these broken dolls for the next 50 years. Just how vast is a 5-decade collection of dolls? Probably thousands of dolls. Tourists who visited the island were often amazed by the large number of dolls hanging on the trees. Even when Julian was alive, tourists were often curious about the dolls, and he was always happy to show them around. But the island did not become a hotspot for tourists until after Julian's death in 2001, Probably because even if he had no trouble showing the occasional tourists the dolls, he would not have enjoyed having so many people entering the island, since it was still his home. There is as much mystery surrounding Julian's death as there is around his life. One day, Julian's nephew, Anastasio Velasco, came to the island to help Julian plant pumpkins. As he was working, he noticed a body floating in the lake at the same spot of the girl who had died over 50 years ago. It turned out to be Julian's body. Some believe the girl's spirit had lured Julian to where she had died and caused him to drown there. Still, some sources claim his death was more mundane, that he died from a heart attack. Anastasio says, "At night on the island, you can hear the girls crying and his uncle's cane thumping on the ground." Anastasio would later assume guardianship of the island until he died in 2019, after which it passed to his nephew, Sanchez Santana. Julian is buried on the island, and on his grave there is a marble headstone. The Island of Dolls is accessible by small, colorful boats called traginera. Passing through the canals of the Chinampa, the island is about an hour and a half from Embarcadero Cuemanco, roughly 27 kilometers from Mexico City. Although many rowers will transport people to the island, some refuse to go there because they believe the girl's spirit possesses the island. Some claim they have felt lured to the spot where the girl died. The journey to the island includes a tour of the ecological era, the Ajolete Museum, the Apatlaco Canal, the Texulo Lagoon, and the Lerrona Island. The full tour of Xochimilco takes around 3 to 4 hours. Upon entering the island, you can see dolls hanging from wires tied to the trees. There are all sorts of dolls there. Barbie dolls, cowgirl dolls, baby dolls, clown dolls, rag dolls, princess dolls, you name it. Many of the dolls are missing one arm or a leg. Sometimes the head is missing. The ones that do have heads fix to you with a haunting blank, glassy stare. The dresses on some of them are ripped, and because they have been exposed to the elements for so long, some of the dolls are decaying. You can find cobwebs and all sorts of insects making a home on the dolls. Some tourists claim to see the dolls move their eyes and swivel their heads and hear the dolls sobbing quietly, sometimes whispering things like "Mama" or "Help me." Sometimes they laugh and light up in the night. Does this mean there is a chance that the dolls are possessed? The island has a museum in a small cabin with a store and 3 rooms, where Julian lived during his time. In one room, which is believed to be Julian's bedroom, you can find several dolls hung on the walls, including the first doll he ever collected and his favorite doll, Augustinita. People often leave coins, trinkets, or their own dolls in the room, which has become a sort of shrine, in exchange for miracles and blessings, while some change the dolls' clothes and clean them as an act of worship. You can also find articles from local newspapers about the island in Julian Santana Barrera. Julian lived the better part of his life overcome with grief over the little girl's death. He reportedly blamed himself for her death. Was collecting the dolls his way of coping with the grief that plagued him? Even more interesting is that his family and some locals claim the drowned girl's story never happened. They say it was all a fabrication of Julian's mind. Was it a false memory? Or was Julian suffering from an undiagnosed mental condition that made him see and believe things that were not real? Nobody ever suspected Julian of killing the girl, but what if he did and was being haunted by his guilty conscience? Did the girl have any other relationship with him aside from being just a girl he had found drowning on his island? Why was he so strongly affected by her death? The Island of Dolls was never built to be a tourist attraction, but it is one of the places tourists visit, especially ghost hunters, adventurers, and anyone who loves the wild and dangerous. UNESCO declared Xochimilco a World Heritage Site in 1987, making it a more popular tourist attraction. Apart from the likely possessed dolls, the island boasts feral cats, spiders, and a wide range of vegetation. An eco-tourist rescue made on the island in 1987 revealed that it was covered with water lilies. Even before Julian encountered the drowned girl or lived on the island, there were stories of people dying in the canals around it. According to Gerardo Ibarra, co-founder of Ruta Origin, a sustainable travel company in Mexico, many women and children fled to the canals to hide from Spanish soldiers during the time of Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. Cortez led an army against the Aztec Empire and built Mexico City, securing the territory for Spanish control. Some of the women killed themselves, preferring to die rather than to get captured by the Spanish. The area was sometimes used as a shelter for Mexican revolutionaries and religious practitioners fleeing persecution, some of whom were killed or drowned in the canals. The island first came into the limelight in 1943 when Mexican filmmaker Emilio Fernandez filmed the award-winning movie Maria Candelaria there. The movie follows the life of a young woman named Maria Candelaria, who is ostracized by the society for being the daughter of a prostitute, and her romance with her lover, Lorenzo Rafael. It became the first Mexican film to be screened at the Cannes International Film Festival, and is the first to win the Palme d'Or award. This was about a decade before Julian started collecting dolls for the island. It became known as the Island of Dolls in the mid-1950s, and since then, some international and local news channels, including the Huffington Post, the Travel Channel, and ABC News, have featured articles about the island. Paranormal TV shows, such as the Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures and Amazon Prime's Lore, have also featured the island. Several imitations of the Island of Dolls have popped up around the canal, and the owners use it to scam unwitting tourists. One way to know if you are at the real Island of Dolls is that the dolls are not immediately visible from the boat. You have to step on the island and move further into it before the dolls appear. Despite the Island of Dolls' reputation as a haunted place, the locals generally believe that the island is charmed, not possessed. They believe Julian's spirit joined the girl's spirit after he died, and that they watch over the island.